This is backed by popular demand. We said that not just hyperbole, but we did this my first fall when I was here. So we're coming up on 3-4 years later, and we're going to be doing this on a regular basis, not just because people want the information, but actually the prayer book enjoins its priests to have these kinds of conversations with their parishioners on a regular basis. All right, about how you are preparing for your end-of-life issues, both theologically, spiritually, practically, and all of that. So that is one of the reasons we're doing this, but we'll talk a little bit more about why we're doing it right now at this time of year. You're not going to get out of here without some little formation, all right? But the idea is, let's just sort of put it all out there, that facing and addressing matters of mortality, particularly our mortality as humans, and still as Christians, is really important, really difficult, and really complicated. And so that's why we want to be here to help you navigate some of that. And there are some very, very, very important practical matters to consider, and those are liturgical, and we'll talk about that today, medical, legal, and financial. And so today we're going to talk about the liturgical side and some of the sort of the spiritual preparation for our own mortality. And next week we're going to hit things a little more practically with some handouts and information that will either encourage you or can affirm work that I hope you've already done as far as preparing your own affairs, as we say. All right? And today, sort of in the second half of our class, we're going to talk about how we talk about this and these decisions with others. So it's two things have to happen today. We have to start thinking about this stuff for ourselves, and then we have to work up the courage to start communicating those decisions that we made with others, or finding ways to organize this information so that it can be easily shared, or is already known, even better. All right? Now, why do we do it at this time of year, which is the same time of year we did it before? Well, if you're paying attention in the world and in the church, you realize we're in what I call the autumn triduum. Now, when do we usually talk about the triduum? Holy Week, right? Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, Easter Saturday, or Holy Saturday, leading into Easter Day. 3 holy days that sort of are a full liturgical season and story. Well, similarly, we have a little bit of that within the church, even though it came about a little bit later. But part of the reason is that fall is a season where the increasing the idea of mortality becomes more and more evident by the day, right? The leaves start to drop, the wind gets a little brisker, all of a sudden the world is starting to go into that hibernation, into that death that will then be reborn in the spring, right? And I think it is for that day, it is for that reason that the church has chosen to mark its annual feasts of death and dying at this time of year. Just as in the winter solstice, they took that, the darkest time of the year, and chose to mark the feast of the incarnation, of light and life, of Christmas. And in the spring, when that new life bursts forth out of that winter tomb, we celebrate the feast of the resurrection and Easter, right? In autumn, the church chooses to talk about death. And that predominantly fixates around All Saints' Day, which is November 1st, but is preceded by what on October 31st? All Hallows, All Saintly, All Holy Ones Eve, right? So it is the All Hallows Eve was originally a religious observation, even though it wasn't an official one, an unofficial religious observation. And then later on, they added the Feast of All Souls, the Feast of all the faithful departed. Here's a little bit of that history, right? In the 9th century, Pope Gregory established November 1st as the particular day to mark All Saints' Day in the Roman Empire. And Christians had long marked special days to honor their ancestors in the faith. All Martyrs' Day was a feast day much earlier than that in the first few hundred years of Christianity, but when it came time to standardize it, the first day of November seemed the most appropriate. Actually, the selection of November 1st as All Saints' Day probably started in Ireland and moved to England and then on to the continent. And that explains some of the pre-Christian Celtic mythologies and overtones associated with something like All Hallows Eve, Halloween. All Hallows Eve, Hallows equaling saints, is a mixture of the ancient Celtic harvest festival traditions and this season of gathering and of dying and reaping, mixed with the tradition of all the saints coming home. So what they would do was dress up the night before to keep any evil spirits at bay, and they would go door to door asking for little cakes, so that little treats along the way. And it is not uncommon, as we said, for Christianity to mix in with local practices and traditions and customs, especially as it spread into new lands. And as I said, Halloween is not an official feast day, but it is obviously widely practiced, perhaps more so than All Saints and All Souls Day. All Souls Day comes a little later, and it's worth noting All Saints Day is saints spelled with a capital S. These are the saints that are on our calendar, are the people who have lived lives of particular distinction in the faith, so they're somewhat separated, elevated into capital S saints. But in the New Testament, the words that translated as saints, the hagioi, the holy ones, is with a lowercase s, and it meant all the faithful. So they wanted to be able to account not just for the really famous ones we knew about, but for all the saints, little lowercase s, and that is how we get All Souls, or All Faithful Departed Day. And that comes around in about the 10th century, so about 100 years later, after Gregory really fixates November 1st as All Saints' Day. And so it becomes the day after, November 2nd. So we have these 3 days, October 31st, November 1st, and November 2nd. Now, All Souls Day was eliminated after the Reformation due to the abuses of masses for the dead. If you know your Christian history, you know that one of the issues that the Reformers took with the Roman Catholic Church at the time was that they were peddling these services to say, give us money and we'll pray for your dead loved one to make sure that they make it to heaven. And it was very lucrative. They made a lot of money that way. Now, the Reformation says, this All Souls Day is a little too close to that, so let's get rid of it. But it was brought back as an optional observance, which we mark in the Episcopal Church on November 2nd, and we will do that tonight at our special Requiem Eucharist, which I hope you have on your calendar and will be joining us for. So that's why we shift our focus to these matters, I think, at this time of year. The natural world provides the stage, and the church provides the drama. But of course, the Christian faith, we talk about death a lot through the course of the year. We're surrounded by death in Christianity, and frankly, it is at the center of our faith, whether we choose to acknowledge that or not. The cross, an instrument of shameful death, becomes a symbol of victory and life. The one last most important enemy that God in Christ must overcome and to restore us to right relationship with Him is that fact of our mortality. So, what does that mean for us who are in these 3 holy days where the veil between this life and the next is particularly thin? It means it's a particularly good time for us to be thinking about these things in a way that I hope will be engaging, interesting, and not terribly dour, sour, and really depressing. All right? So we're going to start talking about funeral planning. Okay? And let me just say, as a priest, we do a lot of funerals. So I've not done scientific research into this, but I have anecdotes up the wazoo that would say any and all work that you can do ahead of time, not just on your funeral, but on your funeral, is incredibly helpful. The way in which you can set up your loved ones for success, and by success I mean not pulling their hair out thinking, what hymns did Grandma like? What readings should we do? How do we, in the midst of my grief and all the other things I need to be worrying about, have to try to read through 1,000 documents and say, this one? I don't know. It also allows you to be present in that service. It is so helpful to be able to say, you know what, we sang that song because it was Jim's favorite. Or we have this reading because it meant something really important. And then that's an entry into your own psyche and soul that we can use to celebrate your life when the time comes. I also will say this, funerals are for the living, not for the dead. And so if you choose to make things more difficult on your loved ones, you're making it a less enjoyable experience, a less helpful experience. Because what we hope, and we work really hard on funerals, and we do a lot of them, like 20 plus a year sometimes, is that this will be one of the ways, one of the conduits that move you along in your grief, I mean the living ones, at the death of your loved one. That there will be a certain catharsis, a certain closure that comes from having a chance in a sacred way, especially in a place that may have been important to the deceased, to be able to honor their life and give them the gift of that celebration. So you making plans ahead of time is one of the greatest gifts you can give your loved ones, and one of the greatest gifts they can give you is honoring those wishes here. And we have a file upstairs in Judy's office that has every notes that we have been given on particular parishioners and individuals. So if you make these choices, please give them to us and we will hold on to them. And we'll go and check, this person has just died, do we have any notes from them on their wishes? And that is a great place to start. Because, as you see, there's going to be a lot of decisions to make. And some of them are really small. But those of you who have gone through this with a loved one will know that any decision starts to feel like a monumental decision. And the amount of them starts to pile up pretty quickly when you're just trying to figure out, I don't even know where, I can't even get into their computer, where are their passwords, that kind of stuff. We'll talk about that. All right? So be thinking about this now as a way of really actually giving a gift, really loving your loved ones in a way that's going to help them. So, start with this. Your obituary. Might you write it? Might you put down some notes that you want to make sure are included? Some things that you want to say, this is what's really important to me, what I'm really proud of? That's an onerous task to write a 500-word essay that tries to encapsulate the life of your mother or your brother in the midst of passing through your own grief. Could you help ahead of time on that? Those of you who knew Pat King, Pat wrote her own obituary, and it ran, and it was good. It was really good. And it was really helpful because those of us who are trying to bring a life into a few minutes of celebration knew what was important to her to communicate to the world. Okay? Have you decided where you're going to be buried and how? I see some nodding heads. That's great. If you haven't, that's something to decide ahead of time. Because there's a lot of places that are kind of full. And it's expensive. And so attending to this ahead of time, again, is a gift you can give to your loved ones. Have you decided whether you're going to be sort of in a casket or cremated, or do a green burial? More and more common these days. Let's take a moment to explain the options that we have here at Christ in St. Luke's. We have, as you've seen in our beautiful, newly renovated memorial garden, two ways for you to be interred here at Christ in St. Luke's. One is, and they're both after having been, both with ashes, after having been cremated. One is in the columbarium, which is up on the wall, and you see the nameplates, the squares. Those are called niches. In those niches, you can fit 2 boxes of ashes. Those are, for the most, actually exclusively spoken for at this point. So if you haven't booked one of those, no room at the inn. Now, some people choose over time to either sell them back or say, actually, we don't need them, or the family makes a different decision or something like that. In that instance, there may be some that come available, but we just don't know, and we can't promise it, and so you should probably make other plans, and if you want to throw a note in to say, should it become available, I would like this to be the choice. The other choice, which we've just started, is interment in a consecrated bit of ground that is in that circle as you go into, that has the cross in the middle and some plants along the edges. That is very clearly and kept sacred ground. And what we do is we dig a hole with a shovel in the ground, and we put the dirt to the side, And at the committal, at the end of the service, we've just done this recently a couple of times, some of you may have been at these services, we open the bag of ashes and we pour them into the ground. And then we cover it back up after everybody's left, and it becomes one again with the earth. Earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, which is what we say and before we do the final priestly blessing over the body. People who are buried in that burial ground, we're calling it, are... we don't have markers in there because that would also fill up. This is meant to be evergreen in the sense of it becomes, something we can use for years and years and years on. If you look, we have recently installed a big plaque at the end of the columbariums closest to Olney Road where you can have your name added to the list. It's not quite the same size, but it is a way in which you can have your presence there marked for that. We have the ability, although it needs to be clearly communicated ahead of time, that if you are a couple who both want that, we can try to leave a space below, even if one dies many years later. But that then needs to be clearly notated for us, or we can't be held responsible for filling the list as it comes. All right? Chris, question.
Yeah, question. How much for like the hole in the ground?
How much for the hole in the ground? Fair question, Chris. The hole in the ground is cheaper than the columbarium. The whole funeral service itself, there are fees that are associated with it that pay for the organist, the sexton. There's an optional contribution to the priest discretionary fund and some to cover the overhead of using the building for that time. You'll get one invoice for about $1,000. Now that may change in the future, so don't be quoted to that for the future. The actual burial, I forget the niches, a few thousand or something like that for those who have them. And the burial ground is only like 150, 200. And then the nameplate is another, less than 100 or something like that. So it's only a couple $100, let's call it, for the hole in the ground. All right? Yeah. Oh yeah, or the hole, you have the hole in the wall and the hole in the ground. You get to choose.
My husband passed away a long time ago, okay?
Yeah.
Right now, he's probably around Reverend Angel's rose bushes, okay?
Okay.
But if we could, gather some of the dirt or whatever, can we stick him in there too?
Let's you and me talk about that. Let's you and me talk about that. That sounds like an exception to the rule. Generally not what we would do, but let's talk about it. All right? All right, so that's about stuff you need to think of ahead of time that is related to the funeral but not exactly part of the funeral. But now we're getting into the service itself. We allow for eulogists at Christ and St. Luke's. Usually 1 to 2 is preferred. Each one speaking no more than 5 minutes each, please. And the reason for that is not that we want to try to cut off people who are trying to share wonderful, good, funny stories about the deceased. The reason is, one of the things that I and we talk about a lot within liturgy is balance. And if you've got 45 minutes of talking at the front of the service, by the time you get to the stuff where you really want to be focused and engaged with your heart, mind, and soul, you're kind of spent. And it's not because I want to make sure you have ears left to listen to my homily, it's because I want you to be there and be able to fully engage in the totality of the service, whether that includes communion, the burial, all that stuff. So if we have people talking for too long, that is something just to note that happens. All of a sudden it gets out of balance. All right? Couple of eulogists, 5 minutes each, works really, really well. Another question you want to consider, Eucharist or not? I'd say majority of our funerals do not have Eucharist, but I'd say probably 30 to 40% do. So either way is fine. You'll want to be thinking about what was important to you from a spiritual perspective, whether communion would be important, and the people who are coming, how comfortable would they be in a situation where they had to make a decision about participating within the Eucharist or not. All right? Rite 1 or Rite 2. I hope you guys, even if you're taking Episcopal 101 right now, I hope you know the difference. Rite 1 and Rite 2, our 8 o'clock service is in Rite 1 language. Rite 2 for the 10:15. Rite 1 is the these and thous, the saith the Lord kind of thing. And the Rite 2 is more contemporary, meaning 1970s American English. So that's you to use, and the no THs at the end of words. But some people like that feeling of, I am resurrection and I am life, saith the Lord. It gives a certain dignity to it. So even if you're a 10:15er, some people choose Rite 1 for their funeral. and vice versa. Those are decisions that need to be made. And if your loved ones aren't particularly members of this church or a church, that becomes very confusing for them. So that's just one of those small things that you could sort out ahead of time that would be very, very helpful. Now, your packet that is in front of you has all the suggested readings that are in the prayer book. Remember, it says suggested readings and hymns, right? That is for you to start reviewing. Now, a couple of things. Stay with me here. You can have the full slate. You can have an Old Testament, a Psalm, a New Testament epistle, and a gospel reading. You can also have fewer than that. The only requirement is that if you choose to do communion, you need a reading from the gospel. All right, so if you say, yes, I want communion, then know that one of the things you have to choose in the readings is the gospel, and a priest will read the gospel. The other thing you need to be thinking about is who you want to be those eulogists and do those readings. If you have suggestions for that, also very helpful. Is it children? Is it siblings? Is it good friends, work partners, things like that? Okay? Those are things, not just what they are, but who they are. I allow for a poem, being the English that I am. It needs to have at least as many passages from Scripture. So it can't be just a poem. There needs to be at least one passage from Scripture to balance it out. Now, if you have 2 or 3 passages from Scripture, all the better. We won't go more than that 4, so we won't add, a poem would replace something if you wanted the full slate. All right, does that make sense? Are you tracking with me here? You have in front of you, again, the suggested readings. The prayer book has pulled out some passages from Old Testament, some Psalms, some New Testament that have, and gospel readings that work well within a funeral context. They are not, I see you, Melissa, but they're not the only readings you can choose from Scripture. If you have other passages that are really powerful and important to you, those are fine. If you have a passage, a poem, or anything outside of Scripture, will need to be vetted and approved by the priest. All right? Melissa, question.
Is this available online?
We are going to make it available online. Yes, okay. So that's readings, readers, music. Everyone's favorite thing to be thinking about at their funeral. This is the part people do like to think about. You can't plan a concert. I know, yeah. If you want a concert, have a concert. If you want to do the Burial of the Dead liturgy, it needs to fit, again, balanced within the other things. So if you have 10 pieces of music and 1 reading, you're going to be out of balance. All right? Now, music is very, very important to our spiritual lives, particularly here in our community, and you have priests and musicians who love to include that in a funeral. You're not going to get a fight from us on it. We're just asking you to help us out here with your balance. So let's think about hymns. 2 to 3, with a 4th in the pocket in case you decide to do communion and we think we're going to need to cover the time there. At the back page of that packet, there's a list of the hymns there, just the numbers and the names. You'll need a hymnal if you want to sort of refer to those, if that doesn't jog your memory enough there. 2 to 3 hymns. Having the choir for a funeral is not standard. And is something of a project to put together, just because it depends on coordinating a lot of schedules, and many of our choir members will work full-time during the week. So we can't promise the choir. If it's important to you, you can certainly note it and we can try, but we can't promise it just based upon how it's all going to shake out, timing, and people's availability. What we can usually promise is a soloist or an instrumentalist. So if you would like a soloist to sing, if you have particular requests, you can add a name if you want, knowing that that person may or may not be available. Or you can just say a soloist to sing this piece, which is very meaningful to me, or it was to my family or something. Instrumentalists, similarly, if you have someone who plays the violin or the cello or the harp or the piano, and they want to offer something as a part of the service, note that as well. And you can either say, I'd like this person to do it, and we will reach out on your behalf, or you can reach out to them and say, hey, at my funeral, I'd really love if you would play or sing. And know that this is penciled in because it's subject to various variables that we cannot control. So that's another way to get that in. If you have requests for the prelude and the postlude, those are some places to get some extra music in. Those are usually organ and those are usually played the last 15 minutes before the service starts, and the last, as we head out, after the last hymn, sometimes played. If we're going out to do a committal, usually there's no postlude, it's the bell as we leave in silence out to the memorial garden. But if you want, you have the option. If you're not doing that, you have an option for a postlude as people are leaving. I'm going to head and say this, and I know many of you will not fight me on this, but people always do. It's got to be sacred music. There is a time and place for your favorite Spotify playlist, and that is at the reception. We don't prefer to try to figure out how to integrate your college fight song or believe me, that's been requested. Doug knows, VMI gets a lot of requests for that. As well as like My Way and things like that. I mean, no, you've heard these, right? You've all heard these, right? It's just not in keeping with the kind of atmosphere we are trying to create within the service itself. Now, we have ways that we can work around this. If it is essential to have a particular piece, we can try to figure that out. But I'm asking you to try to keep it to sacred music, please. Homily or no homily, it's actually optional in the prayer book. Some people don't want it, some people do want it. For my part, as a priest, I take them very seriously and work very hard on them. So I'm happy to do that, but it's helpful if you note that. And you cannot request, you can request, we cannot always honor a particular request for a particular preacher, because a lot of it depends on date and time and things like that. Some people will say, and this is not sort of about me, but they'll say, the priest they know, will you do my funeral? And if a priest moves on, let's use Wynne as an example. A lot of people knew and loved Wynne, and he is still around, he's still a member of the parish. They will say, Wynne, would you do my funeral? I want you to preach my funeral, I want you to do my funeral, which I don't take offense at. Wynne is lovely. And he will say no, and I will say no, because of the way in which the pastoral relationships shift and change over time within a congregation. So that's just something to note ahead of time. You can say, I would love, if possible, for this person to do it, but just know it may not be possible for a number of different reasons. All right? You can have a guest preacher, though. So if you have an uncle or a family friend who's a minister and who's ordained or who's in another Episcopal church, they can be invited to come in and preach. We don't keep our pulpit on lock. We just have certain requirements based upon prior pastoral relationships within the parish. Does that make sense, the distinction between those? Other details. Do you have favorite flowers? Favorite colors? Things like that. Those of you who are on the Flower Guild that are sitting out there know it's very helpful to have a little bit of an idea or a theme to work with when it comes to choosing those for the funeral, or flower shops that we refer people to also greatly value that. Would you like there to be memorial donations made in your memory somewhere? This is different than like a bequest, right? Just to be clear. We'll talk about that next week. This is, in lieu of flowers, donations may be made to, the ASPCA or something like that, because they loved animals. Or the person struggled with cancer for many years, and so the American Cancer Association, or something like that. Or, always, possibly, the church. We appreciate that. And donations that come in, unless they've been otherwise designated in memorial donations for the church, are put into something called our memorial fund, which we usually use to supplement if we need to buy particular things for the altar or for worship. So just so you know, like when we need to get new stoles or a new paraments or new linens, we will often take money out of that fund because that's sort of outside regularly budgeted items. Doesn't need to happen regularly every number of years, but that's where that money goes, unless it is otherwise designated to a particular fund or purpose. All right, I talked about the fees. I'm going to stop there and say, are there any questions now about funeral planning specifically? Yes, Ann.
Do you still permit the piper at the end of the service, like going out to the committal?
We do, and that is also just subject on availability. So a lot of this just has to do with timing as well, which is outside of our control. Yeah, Andrew.
Do you have any advice for how I approach this to a loved one without them thinking I might hurt myself this time?
I do. And it's right here. We're going to talk about that in a minute, Andrew. So that's a good pause for just a second on that thought, and we'll come right back to it. Other questions? Singer.
So, would the Nunc Dimittis be acceptable either as a reading or to have a choir being sung?
Yes. So there are, the Nunc Dimittis is the Lord, you now dismiss your servant in peace to go in peace, go in peace as you have promised, for these eyes of mine have seen the Savior whom you have prepared for all the world to see. The Song of Simeon has some beautiful musical settings. If it's a musical thing that we're requesting, there are some places we can put that in. We either will do that as a part of the commendation, which is the final farewell inside the church, and we'll either have while the priests are gathered around the ashes or the body, we'll have the choir sing as a part of that, or out at the graveside, if we're being interred or buried here, we can move out there, and that would have to be necessarily a cappella in that instance, but there are chances for it musically. It also could be a reading. It could be used in place of a psalm or something as well. So we can certainly include that. That would be an appropriate one. Other questions? Yeah.
The eulogist,
Yes.
they do readings exclusively, or do they?
The eulogist would be talking about the person. So they would have to compose it. It wouldn't be given to them. Readers would have the reading right in front of them that say, read what's on the page. Eulogist is different than the reader. Yes, thank you for clarifying that. This is the person that can speak to what kind of coworker this person was, what kind of father or mother this person was, something like that. Other questions? Yes, Connie.
Date and time of service, how soon after someone dies?
Great question.
etc.
Part of that depends on whether you're being cremated or will be in a casket. If you're cremated, you have a little bit of a longer window, so to speak. My recommendation is, so we have done in the past, and it's a little bit brutal to the staff, we can't do it within a week. So we've had people who die on Tuesday and say, I want my funeral on Saturday. And sometimes we've tried to pull that off, and it's just a lot to pull together. So usually, I would say in that sort of 3 to 6 week window is pretty good, especially if you're going to have people coming in from out of town. Now, if you're not going to be having people coming in from out of town, a couple weeks is probably fine. Again, the timeline changes a little bit, but with modern science, so to speak, not that much. You can preserve a body that's going to be in a casket for a pretty long time. So I would say 2 to 3 weeks, 3 to 4, and then, but any longer than 6, and it starts to drag a little. And it becomes difficult for people to sort of have that period at the end of the sentence, that closure, that sense of closure. Is that helpful, Connie, as sort of a window there? Yeah. We usually will do them in the mornings like 11 a.m. because what usually works well is to have an 11 a.m. service. Some people grumble if it's earlier than that. And then you usually can transition from that. The service usually lasts about an hour. If you add communion, call it an hour and 15. Then you're into a nice sort of lunchtime reception sort of feel, if you would like a reception. We prefer Fridays because Saturdays we often have weddings. And so it's just easier to do them on a Friday, plus all the staff is already usually here for the most part. But we also do them on Saturdays. We won't do them on Sunday. And we can do them in the afternoon if that's what works best for people, but it just needs to be thought about ahead of time.
So not Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday?
We can do those, but that requires more shifting around of the calendar in terms of other things that are happening either in the space or in people's calendars as well. So anything is possible, but our preference is for that Friday or Saturday late morning window.
I thought you said Saturday then because of weddings. No.
Saturdays, we prefer Friday to Saturday because of weddings. But we can do them on Saturdays if it's open and if it's possible. So it's sort of Friday's number 1, Saturday's number 2, other days, afternoons on Fridays probably number 3, and then other days of the week, number 4. Peggy, did I see you?
Well, I was gonna say about the reception, but if it's on Saturday, they could have it in here, but if it's on a weekday, there's no place here to have a reception.
We cannot host funeral receptions here.
At all, even on Saturday.
Even on a Saturday, just because of the kind of space we have and the availability. And this is one of the great realities we are confronting as we live in a new building. We are running into space issues already. And some of the ways, those of you who've been to coffee hour will know this room is already packed for coffee hour, and some people are saying, too packed for me. And so we don't want that feeling. So we're trying to think about how we ameliorate that and how we address that. One of the main things that we don't have the capacity to do in our new building is host a funeral reception. We can sometimes do something in the garden, but that's limited in size. We can't put out a full buffet for 200 people outside. It's weather dependent and things like that. So we have done ones with like little cookies and lemonade or something, if that's the vibe you want or your family wants. It works better for like other kinds of services to a funeral. Funeral, we often are looking for something more formal that can function a little better than the spaces that we have. Yeah, Abby.
You don't suggest graveside funerals. That's something older people sometimes do.
We don't suggest them because they're not always requested, but if that's what you would prefer, we can do a brief service at graveside and have that be it. So we can come together as a family and friends, and there's usually 20 people or so, maybe 40 if you get some other people coming, and we sort of are set up under a little tent, and it's usually, we've sort of taken the committal, which is the burial part, expanded it a little bit with a little bit of extra prayers and readings, but it's 5-10 minutes, and that's all. So if you're not looking for the whole church thing, you can certainly do that as well.
So the committal is not done at the gravesite?
The committal is done at the graveside if, for example, you're going to Forest Lawn or Elmwood or something like that. We will usually get in. You can either do it before with just the family, and therefore the body or the ashes would not be present in the service, which is okay. Or you can get in the car and everybody drives together in a train over to the graveside and does it there. We certainly still do that. When I was talking about ways to be buried, I was focused just on the ones that we have control over here. But if you have a plot in one of the historic cemeteries here in Norfolk or Virginia Beach or something, the funeral home then can get us from here to there.
And a priest will go with them?
A priest will go with them, absolutely. And they could also, it's been done where we schedule it at another time. So we say, we're just going to do the funeral now, and then in a month, we're just going to get the 8 of us or whatever who want to be there for the burial together, and we schedule that with the priest's calendar to be there and do, again, the sort of 5 to 10 minute service there. Peg.
Is such a thing as a columbarium side service?
Yes, we've done those, yeah. An interment service, we call them, not internment. Interment is jail. Interment, an interment service. But yes, we could do those as well, and we have, and sometimes. And also, and sometimes we've done the funeral, and people have said we don't have the ashes, or we don't have the people to actually do the interment, so we do that separately later as well. Gigi.
How about out-of-town burials? Church services and then out-of-town?
We can do it. It requires a lot of planning, and we can't promise that we'll either be available, to do that. It just will depend. Depending on how far out of town, there would be questions of, paying for the priest's ticket and hotel and things like that to sort of account for that. But if it's driving distance, we can set a time to do it. I don't think it works if you're going to expect like everyone in the congregation to get in the car and drive 2 hours. That would be too much to ask. But anyways, but yes, we can do them. We want to be there for you as best we can. The reality is sometimes it's just hard to coordinate the more complicated it gets. Yes, Connie again, yeah.
So is a 5-minute graveside service different from the committal graveside?
Not a great deal. It's
So
just that
you
portion.
all in one.
Yeah, so if you have the full funeral and then the committal, it would just be tacking on that 5 minutes to the end of the service. If you want just the burial, just the committal, it would just be that 5-minute service there. Essentially, yes. Yes, essentially. Bill?
Two not related questions. One is, can we do military?
You can do military honors. Here in the neighborhood, we don't love doing a salute, a 21-gun salute. We have to alert the police. No, I'm serious. We have to alert the police. It echoes off our stone walls in ways that are not nice and really quite displeasing. But we could do the taps. We can do the folding of the flag and things like that.
And is the option to have the service recorded available?
Yes, there is an additional fee for that, though, as well, because we have to bring someone in for it, and then the use of the technology and such. But it can be recorded. We can live stream them privately. We don't publicly do live stream funerals. So if you say, if your nephew can't make it, and he says, I want to tune in from San Diego or something, we create a link that you as the family can send to your loved ones, that then they can tune in and watch, anyone who has the link. But they have to be invited and given access to it. If they don't, and then we keep them, we archive them, but we don't post them. Does that make sense? So it's not like if you don't have it, you could say, oh, I missed Lottie's funeral, I wish I could have seen that. Well, we can't really just give out people's funeral services like that. Melissa.
I'm thinking about couples where it's a mixed marriage.
Yeah.
And like my husband's Jewish, but he hasn't figured out where he wants to be married yet. I already paid for mine, I just have to wait for him to go and get that all.
Thank you, yeah.
And I told him, if you don't make a decision, you're going to my swap. Instead of.
Is that a threat? Let's.
I can't worry about that.
Yeah.
If he makes a decision, that's fine. But at any rate, I'm thinking about the service. I mean, what are the logistics of that? Because he would be there. I was thinking probably, he definitely wants bagpipe.
Okay.
That's the only thing I know.
Well, this will be what we'll have to pick up next week, having this conversation with loved ones. And let me start handing this out now for folks to grab and take with them. And this we will refer to, actually, let me take one so I have it. This we'll start talking about next week. This is from the Conversation Project. This is mostly oriented medically, but the principles can still apply, because what this is a little bit of a workbook for you to start going through that talks about what matters to you. Not all the decisions, but what are some of the principles you want to be honored at your end of life, medically, and then we will talk next week about legally, financially, and things like that. But this can help. It also has some tips for how to start this conversation with loved ones at home, Thanksgiving, sometime where the people who need to know. And if you can't tell them, this tries to help get you started a little bit on that. To your question about mixed marriages or interfaith or things like that, this church considers it one of the great honors of the ministry to work with people at end of life and for funerals. So we will do whatever we can. That's all right, Andy, we can pick it up. We will do whatever we can to honor either the faith traditions or the non-faith traditions of an individual while still providing some time of comfort and peace and reassurance. So what exactly that looks like will just depend, but we're committed to trying to help as best we can. Does that make sense? Because I know that Melissa's not the only one in that situation as well. And last question before we got to go to church.
When my husband died, I had a cousin who's a Catholic priest.
Yep.
And he was permitted, you have to get permission from the bishop.
You have to. If it's a Roman Catholic thing, it gets more complicated, probably almost even more complicated than Jewish.
They did allow him to read his gospel.
Yes, there's a limit on what you can do as a Roman Catholic priest or minister within a church that is not Roman Catholic, and it's pretty strict. So just know that as well. All right, we're going to pick this up next week. I'm sorry, Muriel, we got to go. Last thing.
Okay, I was just going to say, I really appreciated going to the gravesite first, before the funeral. It really was comforting. It was done. I didn't be upset, and the service went really well.
So that's a word for the pre-service interment or burial as well. So just an option for you to consider. Next week, we will talk about how to have these conversations, and we'll pick up some of the legal, medical, and financial things you need to be thinking about as well. Thank you guys very much.